Well, hello. Good day, everyone. I stopped saying like good morning and everything because I'm not morning anything. I cancel those thoughts. All right. So, good day. Um, like, we have the worst missing children numbers in the entire world by like orders of magnitude. And so, I don't think you guys are doing things right. You think you're doing things right. And to be fair, I give the How to Catch a Predator, Chris Hansen, a lot of shit. I guess the one silver lining, the good thing about that is it exposes a lot of the power structures behind, all the sexual stuff. But it's mainly a show designed to get you to like attack, sexually erring adults that were sexually abused, and then you guys are just like fighting amongst yourselves. When you start poking at the top and the power structures that create all these problems, then they're like, oh, we got to cancel that show. But you mainly acted like Alba stars. Like, most of the time you acted demonic, did the sexual shaming, and I just don't agree with that sort of stuff. And so I just kind of like, I'm like, yeah, the kid stuff, and you guys should probably focus on the actual, like, another thing is they think everything under 18 is pedophilia. And I'm like, no, well, there's a distinction. I would say there's endophilia, and then it gets darker into the pedophilia stuff where the kids aren't even conscious to even make a conscious choice. So they're like on an autopilot. So of course, whatever the family directs them to do will, be what the child does. Whereas when you're an almost adult, you actually have consciousness and you could make decisions. And that's where I have a disconnect with, my supporters and everything. They think I'm, some of them, but the demons definitely attack it because I'm like too honest and everything. And I'm like, well, you're 18 and ups and everything. You guys just kind of like, leave it up to the family, family is guiding the person, and then the person, consents or doesn't consent to a particular situation. And I'm like, well, why don't you guys apply that to your almost adults? And it kind of like looks like freedom, and it's not just sexual stuff with freedoms. You could take these sexual liberties and apply them to a whole bunch of non-sexual things. And then it's like, oh my God, yeah, that's like freedom. People have their, personal affairs and business or whatever, and you just kind of leave it at that. And then it's like a lot less problems. And then you can focus on the actual problems, There was Paul Walker or whatever, I heard on Twitter, they're like, he was dating a 16-year-old or whatever. Well, that was that family's business, that 16-year-old's conscious decision, as well as consent. And people be like, well, we're trying to fucking make the decision for others. You can't consent to that, and it's like, well, I mean, I would say my friend that married when she was 15, maybe 16, to someone almost twice her age or twice her age, that was her family's business. And I think they should have been allowed to just kind of like mess around, all consensual and everything. And marriage was the one, like, like you probably need a little bit more life experience for a long-term contract. Like long-term things, you're going to change your body, get a sex change, marriage, all of these contract things, especially in Hollywood. You should wait until you're 18, for those long-term things. As for weird sexual things, I give, some people leeway in the gray area, what I feel is gray. There are people there where it's no black and white. And I think that's where you guys run into a lot of problems, because you're trying to force evil's family to do things and abide by things. And then they're forcing all of your families to do a bunch of fucking things, even sacrifice your children. Well, hey, they're over 18, so go send them to go attack some innocent people somewhere and kill or be killed, murder some innocents, or be properly, killed by people properly self-defending themselves. Forcing your kids to go to school, learn a bunch of bullshit that they probably, if they ever do awaken, in this lifetime, then they need to unlearn most all of that, and I think child protective services, like things like that, like actually child protecting, should be more local and not funneled into some machine that's going to be funneling them secretly to Baal or Moloch or some sacrificial demon dark figure or something like that. So yeah, I just think with the worst numbers in the world, you guys think that you're fucking doing things right, but you're not. Jumping back to that Paul Walker, there are like 7, 8, 9 year olds younger getting murdered and other non-consenting things, but you like going to focus on like Paul Walker and his like 16-year-old and 30-year-old ass situation. Like that really takes priority over all this other stuff, and it's like you just like focusing on the tip. You're like, no, just the tip, and that's what evil wants. That's why evil masks itself as a child protector, and they're like, oh my god, they weaponize victimhood status and being offended. So they'll be like, oh my god, do you believe Paul Walker and that 16-year-old? Oh my god, blah 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 blah. There's way worse shit going on, so I don't want to fucking hear it. That seemed like a consensual situation, and I'm moving the fuck on because I only have enough time and resources to process a certain amount of things, and I'm going to focus on the worst stuff. You guys can't even. They're like pedophilia, Paul Walker, pedophilia. That was endophilia, first of all. And if you're going to chance pedophilia, then I think single age or single digit age year, like 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Those. When I and you could surely extend it to the tween ages too, but I think people kind of focus on the low hanging fruit. The How to Catch a Predator Chris Hansen show was a show where you guys abused people that were sexually abused but probably don't even know it, because this MK Ultra shit goes on like everywhere at a mass scale. So people that were sexually abused, and quite frankly, if I had to focus on people blowing up and dismembering children and teens, and then there's some weird creep that wants to do some weird sexual thing with an almost adult. I just like those are just way different situations. I'm like, okay, so definitely the child is going to survive in that one situation, and in these other situations the child isn't going to survive. Which one do I focus on? And it's like, yeah, I guess I'm going to focus on the worst stuff, whether people like to believe that or not. And not get caught up by the demons wearing the mask of child protection, and oh my god, there was a 17-year-old with someone twice their age, or a 16-year-old with someone twice their age. You know what? That just sounds like, family business. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like did they consent? And were the participants consenting in there? Taking some guidance from the family. And then you have less noise, less problems, and then you could focus, on the actual problems and actually getting those, missing children numbers down. I think mostly, the Chris Hansen How to Catch a Predator show is, a demonic Albastar thing. And then when they tried, they punched up a few times and they caught a bunch of judges and politicians and cops and all this shit. Then that's when they had to fucking cut it, because it's meant to just, peasants, you all fight amongst yourselves. Look, we secretly sexually abused a whole bunch of people, or they just amnesia instantly, forgot about it, instant amnesia. And then we're going to sexually abuse some other ones that are going to remember it, and those ones that are going to remember it, we're going to encourage them to focus on this is the worst stuff ever, and you're going to attack these other people that have no clue that we fucking sexually abused them. But then when you start coming for us at the top, oh, well, that's got to stop. Like, I feel that you guys are mostly manipulated, and I'm fair and everything. Okay, one silver lining is it exposes all the like power structure, and the show had to be killed for that. And I think you guys could be doing a way better job instead of focusing on all these petty things. You guys should definitely be sexually educating your children, or teenagers before fucking high school. You're just leaving them all fucking vulnerable, to other people inputting into your children. But it's like fucking just normal in society, right? They're like, oh, no, 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 wait until sexual education until like, midpoint in high school. And it's like, so then that leaves them vulnerable to a whole bunch of, now I'm not saying you gotta like, oh, in preschool, you gotta fucking, educate, but, some sort of basic, education. And I find it weird that you guys would teach your children and teens about violence and taking life, whether they're fucking, a gun or going to some martial arts classes or driving a vehicle. But then things that lead to the creation of life and babies and everything, what? What? It's your responsibility, and I'm not a parent. All right, thank the stars, But I'm not a parent, but it is your job as a parent to, prepare and educate your kids about life. And yeah, there's some dark things, and it's nice that you teach them to defend themselves and use violence and maybe murder to like do that, and or just casually getting around where driving a vehicle may in fact lead to someone's death if they are too reckless. But then you're not going to teach them about this other stuff. And of course the angelic families are going to be like, look, this is very sacred, and it's sex and everything, and you use a lot of your energy to produce another life form. And that's why if you masturbate too much, and no bullshit, like if you masturbate too much you're going to go blind, just like if you masturbate too much then you're going to drain your energy, because that's what you're putting out is the energy. And the demonic families are going to be like, yeah, this is great, da 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 da, you should release whenever you can, 17 times a day or a month or whatever the fuck. And that's their personal affairs, right? That's their family business. And if you're going to try to do this democracy and freedom stuff, then you're going to have uncomfortable, awkward situations, where people be like, oh my God, could you believe that cult over there was fucking, having their 13 and 14-year-olds with adults and everything? And it's like, yeah, but, and then they got the government with their cult that does shit with like 4 or 5 6 year olds like sexually and everything, and you're having them fucking fuck up like this other thing that's actually less worse than this other thing, and it's just a fucking mess. And no wonder we have like 1 million missing children per year. And I know these numbers are slightly inflated, but that's definitely like, when are the numbers the actual numbers? They're like, oh shit, missing children sound bad. Let's try to like deflate these numbers as best we can, and that's what occurs, and that's why I'm like, no, it's way more, and it's probably way more than 1 million. We're probably talking about millions. There's a bunch of people birthing without birth certificates, not in the hospital, something to sacrifice. All right, those things are hard to even stop. But there are things you can stop, and I think you should just maybe focus on the worst stuff when people talk about pedophilia. And then instead of talking about some 16, 17-year-old, and labeling that pedophilia too, I'm like, no, that's endophilia, and I just got to make the distinction, and yeah. And I think your almost adults could make weird decisions and consent to it, and everything will be okay. And I think that's why they have like a lot of laws like written, like they do. They're like, oh, it's for the protection of the children. But whenever is it about the protection for the children? They did the lead removal from the paint, which shielded all of you from the EMFs that are fucking like you all up. And they did that under the guise of child protection because they're eating paint chips. But like, I don't know one person that was eating paint chips. And sure, by the power of suggestion, just saying something and having billions of you humans around, some certain percentage of them, a tiny percentage, are going to do that because they're like, oh, paint chips. Oh, like people eat this. Here, let me try it. So yeah, but for the most part, excluding the power of suggestion, ones that got manipulated into it just simply by suggesting such to them, no kids were eating paint chips. No, but it's always the child protection and everything, and it's like, really, I don't think you're serious about that. And in order to protect your children, the good, angelic families and whatnot, then you need to allow these weird, awkward, things, and you just got to let it go so you can focus more on the worst stuff instead of the lighter stuff, at the tip of the iceberg. You need to focus on the stuff way down below, the ocean, the rest of the iceberg. Huh? All right, so don't fucking tell me though that with the worst, the absolute worst numbers, even not my little additional inflation, the absolute worst numbers in the whole world, America, with missing children, that you guys are doing things, right, or mostly right. I don't think. I think the numbers tell a different story. And then you guys, of course, as I said before, you get manipulated into just attacking each other, where you're all victims of abuse. But then they frame it. They're like, oh, look, there's some that remember their sexual abuse. There's some that don't remember their sexual abuse. Let's get them to fight amongst themselves, and it's like, kind of looks like shit. There's this one guy there's this homeless guy that I talked to, and he's like, oh, that stuff in Hollywood. I'm going to go to Hollywood with a gas can and a lighter, and it's like, man, they're going to fucking take the gas from you and light you on fire with your own lighter. The only way you could really handle the Hollywood situation, because it's just, you got to be self-aware that they do, that, underage and way underage sexual shit. All right. So, and then you got to make the decision whether you're going to partake in that, you and your family, or not partake in that. So if you're not going to partake in that, then, you should avoid Hollywood and try not to change it, because all the judges and cops and people just, they have the whole town in on it. All right. And the only way to kill Hollywood is just by not giving it your energy, and not going to see their movies, not listening to their music, not fawning over whatever fucking celebrity. All right, they play. Yeah, I like the Matrix movies. All right, but I'm not going to fawn over or worship like Keanu Reeves or whatever. He played a character. I don't know anything about that guy, but he was portraying someone, like, when I talk, like, yeah, there's like Neo in the Matrix. He's such a badass. I'm talking about that character. I'm not talking about the actor. It could have been one of many fucking actors that played that part just fine. All right, it was, just like people have that disconnect, like with Mark Hamill, and he played Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars movies, and he was against the Empire and it was for the rebels. But then when I see him on TV and everything, he's all touting, the real life Empire and pro Empire this and pro Empire that, and he doesn't look like much of a rebel. And it's like, yeah, because they're different. He's playing a character in a movie. What you like is the character of Luke Skywalker, which is different than Mark Hamill. I know, I hate to blow everyone's mind, but anyway, I wanted to talk about those few things and whatnot. And there was a lot of fisting of my brain, like in that Deadpool Wolverine movie where that chick like reached her hand in her brain. And I guess like they would say like the worst thing. I'm like, I'm like, yeah, just kind of like, leave that almost adult stuff up to the families. And then there you go, and people be like, "Oh my God, you fucking monster! You think families should be able to opt in and opt out and consent to all?" And I'm like, I mean, yeah, like you want your kid to play football or something, right? How is it right for someone else to come and be like, no, you can't fucking do that, or to force them to play football? No, you're gonna fucking play football. And it's just I just see all these activities, whether they're sexual or not, as just activities, and that's how I reconcile this stuff, in my brain. And then there's the weird consenting stuff that I'm just like, okay, whatever, and maybe you should focus on the non-consenting stuff, right? And there's a lot of the how to catch the predators. A lot of that stuff is manufactured. You're just pretending to be someone online. You're luring someone in. It's like there's someone in the neighborhood that's looking for a new bike and praying for it and everything, and then someone puts a bait bike right on their front fucking porch, and they come out and they're like, "Oh my God, someone in the neighborhood got me a fucking, bike, hell yeah!" And then they get on the bike, and then it's all booby trapped and everything, and it's like, I mean, that's essentially what most of that shit was, a bunch of Albostar demonic shit, and you guys think you're being, just righteous angels, and that's how evil tricks you. Just like they trick the troops and everything. They're like, oh, look at them sand ears over there, and they're just terrorists and bad people, and yet the opposite is true. And they trick your kids into violating innocent people, and then possibly getting killed over that too. And there's some demons in the military that enjoy that. They're like, hell yeah. You mean any Afghanistan that looks at me in my eye, I could just murder? Hell yeah. And there's people like that. And then, so anyway, and it all seems really demonic though. That, and if you want to actually protect children, then maybe it should be not how to catch a predator, but how to explore tunnel systems. And you guys, they definitely, I've been seeing some of the stuff from Russia and Ukraine. They have like 30-kilometer fiber optic cable. Guys could probably get internet down in the tunnels if you guys could keep this cord, and hook it up. I'm sure there's some geeks that could do this, no problem. So then you could live stream when you're fucking underground, and actually in case of emergency, you could use that cord, to get back, right? And to follow your way back, right? This sounds really great. And because that's where your problems lie, underneath your feet, underneath the ground. There's a lot of, I can't say it's all evil, but that's definitely where evil hides. So if you're going to, maybe, try finding some, kids, not consenting to these weird sexual things that are underground. How about that for child protection? Instead of focusing on all this weird consenting shit. It's like, and that's another distinction that I make, is the consensual between the non-consensual. It's like, okay, because we got to cut some of the fat out. There's a lot of noise, and that's how I do it. I'm like, okay, well, this stuff is lighter, so, and it seems consensual, so I'm going to focus on the younger ones and where it's not consensual. How hard is that? And of course some demons will come and attack me. I get it, as if I'm like some monster. And yeah, so yeah. All right, I have spoken. You guys have a good day. Bye bye.